There's a store you walked past last week. You didn't go in, you couldn't afford to, but you looked. And for a moment, maybe less than a second, something inside you shifted. A quiet pull, a low hum of want. You kept walking, but the want followed you. That moment wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Not by the store, not by the brand, by something far older than either of those. A mechanism buried inside your brain that was never designed for storefronts or status symbols. It was built for survival. And somewhere along the way, an entire industry figured out exactly how to hijack it.
Here's what nobody tells you about desire. The thing you wanted, through the glass, on the billboard, in the ad that autoplayed before you could skip it, you didn't actually want the object. You wanted what your brain decided the object meant. And your brain made that decision before you were conscious of making it, before you even finished looking. This isn't about willpower. It isn't about being naive or easily influenced. It's about how desire actually works at the level of biology. And once you understand the mechanism, you'll never experience wanting something you can't afford the same way again.
Let's start with a man named Thorstein Veblen, economist, perpetually unemployed despite being considered one of the sharpest minds of the late 1800s, deeply, personally irritated by the wealthy families he observed around him. In 1899, he published The Theory of the Leisure Class, and inside it, he introduced a phrase that became famous: conspicuous consumption. The idea that people don't buy things simply to use them. They buy things to be seen buying them, to announce something about themselves without saying a word. We are all winners today.
Veblen was right about the behavior, but he got the mechanism wrong. He assumed this was a conscious performance, a deliberate choice made by people who wanted to impress. What he couldn't have known, that neuroscience simply didn't exist yet, was that the behavior runs beneath choice entirely. It lives inside the architecture of how your brain processes other people. Your brain is, before anything else, a social organ. It didn't evolve to think about interest rates or evaluate product specs. It evolved to track people. Who has resources? Who holds status? Who is worth aligning with? Who is a threat? This tracking system runs constantly, without your permission, beneath everything you think or feel, like background software you can never fully close.
And here is where it gets genuinely strange. Your brain doesn't track status directly. It tracks signals, visual cues, patterns that correlate, or once correlated, with resource access and survival advantage. For most of human history, those signals were physical. The quality of someone's tools, their physical condition, the group they walked with, the space they occupied without apology. Then markets arrived, then mass production, then advertising. And suddenly there were objects, watches, handbags, cars, shoes, even water in a certain shaped bottle that had been deliberately loaded with signal. Not function, signal.
A researcher named Robert Cialdini spent years mapping the mechanics of human influence. In his documented work on social proof and authority cues, he found something that sounds almost embarrassingly simple. People consistently use price as a proxy for quality, even when they know, consciously, intellectually know, that price and quality are not the same thing, even when they've been told, even when they've been disappointed before. The brain keeps doing it anyway. Because the brain isn't trying to be accurate. It's trying to be fast.
Speed matters here more than most people realize. A landmark study out of Caltech, led by behavioral economist Antonio Rangel, placed subjects inside brain scanners and showed them products attached to different price points. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region tied to valuation and reward, activated differently based on price, not just the object itself. They ran the same test with wine, same bottle, two different price labels. The brains of the people drinking it produced measurably different responses.
And those people reported that the expensive version tasted better. Not because they were lying, not because they were confused, because their brains had genuinely generated a different experience based on what they expected. The expectation rewrote the reality in real time. That is the trick. Not a trick being played on you from outside, a trick your own brain runs on itself, using the information it's been handed.
Now think about how a brand like Hermes operates, or Rolex, or Ferrari. These companies don't advertise the way most brands do. They don't demonstrate what the product does. They don't list features or compare models. They show you a certain quality of light, a certain posture, a certain life. and they let your brain do the rest. Because they understand something most people don't. They're not selling an object. They're selling your brain a stimulus that triggers a specific neural response. And your brain, wired over hundreds of thousands of years to detect and respond to status signals, cannot help but respond. It has no choice.
There's a concept in behavioral economics called aspirational anchoring. You don't need to own the thing. You just need to want it. Because wanting something you can't afford doesn't just produce longing. It reshapes how you see yourself in relation to it. You begin to locate your identity around the gap, around the distance between the person you are now and the person your brain is constructed as the kind of person who would own that. The brand doesn't need you to buy the bag. It needs you to feel the distance. That feeling is the product. The object is just the mechanism for delivering it to you.
A psychologist named Sylvia Bellezza, along with colleagues at Columbia Business School, ran a fascinating set of studies on what she called the red sneaker effect. People who visibly broke dress codes in high-status settings, wearing casual clothes where formal ones were expected, were consistently rated as having higher status than those who conformed. The brain reads confident rule-breaking as a signal of power. Only someone with genuine security doesn't need to perform the signal, which is exactly why the most expensive things in the world often carry no logo at all. The absence of the logo is the signal. It communicates, I don't need you to know. And to a brain scanning for social cues, that silence registers louder than any branding could.
Now, here's the part that should genuinely give you pause. Most of what you experience as your own taste, your preferences, your sense of what looks right, what feels aspirational, what seems worth wanting, was shaped by a lifetime of exposure to signals that someone else designed. You didn't arrive at your desires independently. You absorbed them. Over years, through every image, every film, every moment you watched someone get respected and register what they were wearing while it happened.
This is what made the system so effective. The influence didn't arrive feeling like influence. It arrived feeling like preference, like your own judgment, like you. Cialdini described a related phenomenon he called persuasion, the shaping of a person's mental state before the actual persuasion begins. By the time you're standing in front of something and feeling the pull toward it, the real persuasion already happened, possibly years ago, in every image your eyes absorbed without your mind registering it as influence.
So what is your brain actually doing in that moment, the one from the beginning of this, when you pass the store and feel the pull through the glass? It is running a comparison. Instantly. Not between you and the price tag, between the person you are right now and the person your brain has quietly constructed as the kind of person who owns that. And the gap between those two versions of you produces a very specific emotional signal, something between longing and low-grade inadequacy, something that feels personal, something that motivates. That motivation is the product. The feeling itself was what got sold to you before you ever arrived at the window. A researcher named Russell Belk, one of the most cited consumer psychologists of the past 4 decades, spent much of his career studying what he called the extended self, the idea that people don't experience their possessions as external things they own.
They experience them as part of who they are. Objects don't sit beside your identity. They become woven into it, which means the object in the window isn't just something you want. It represents a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. And the gap between who you are and who that version of you would be, that gap is the engine the entire industry runs on. They need it open. They need you to feel it.
The uncomfortable truth in all of this isn't that you've been manipulated. It's that the manipulation worked using your own biology, the brain's drive to track status, to compare, to locate itself within a social structure. These aren't flaws. They were adaptive. They helped humans survive in groups for hundreds of thousands of years.
The mechanism isn't broken. The problem is that the mechanism was studied and discovered by people who profit from keeping it permanently activated, who built entire markets on the distance between who you are and who the object implies you could be, who need you to feel the gap in order to keep the whole thing running.
You cannot rewire yourself out of having a brain that responds to status. The circuitry is real, the response is automatic. But you can do something that takes a specific kind of attention. You can catch the moment it happens. You can stand inside the pole and ask, is this want actually mine? Or was it constructed for me by someone who understood exactly which nerve to press?
That isn't a question that makes desire disappear. It's a question that changes your relationship to it entirely. There's a store you walked past last week. Something in you moved toward it through the glass. You thought it was about the object. Now you know, it was never
about the object.
At all. It was about your brain running ancient software in a world that spent decades learning how to exploit it, and the pull you felt was someone else's hand on the controls. The question is whether you ever let them touch those controls again without knowing it.